Something unusual is happening in Cincinnati. The tournament was already expecting another massive year. The Cincinnati Open had just come off a record 2025 edition with 285,571 fans, and organizers were preparing for another huge crowd in 2026. The tournament also entered this season with a completely transformed site after a reported $260 million renovation. Then Alex Eala arrived. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't only about who might win the tournament. It was about who could get a ticket to watch Alex Eala. Reports from fans have described a dramatic increase in demand around Eala's matches, with resale prices climbing sharply. Some fans have even reported seeing Eala tickets listed at roughly double the price of other sessions. And that creates an incredible question. How does a 21-year-old player become one of the biggest ticket attractions in a tournament packed with Grand Slam champions? The answer isn't simply rankings. It isn't simply her recent results. It's something much bigger. It's Alex Eala Mania. Because everywhere Eala goes, something follows her. The Philippine flags. The chants. The families. The fans who travel hours just to see one match. And the feeling that when Alex Eala walks onto a tennis court, thousands of people aren't simply watching a tennis player. They're watching someone who represents them. Cincinnati's own tournament announcement essentially acknowledged that phenomenon. When the 2026 player field was announced, the tournament specifically highlighted Eala alongside Brazilian star João Fonseca, describing both as players with ardent, raucous fans who follow them around the world. Cincinnati Open. Think about that. The Cincinnati Open had a field filled with some of the biggest names in tennis. Aryna Sabalenka, Iga Swiatek, Coco Gauff, Elena Rybakina, Naomi Osaka, Mira Andreeva, and plenty of other established stars. Yet the tournament itself singled out Eala's supporters. Why? Because organizers have already seen the evidence. And that evidence has been building for months. Before Cincinnati, Eala's fanbase had already turned tournament venues across the world into something completely different. At Wimbledon, Filipino supporters traveled and queued for hours to see her. At other tournaments, flags appeared in the stands. And as Eala's results improved, the crowds grew with her. The official Roland Garros website noted that Filipino fans were already turning up in significant numbers for Eala's matches across several tournaments, with queues forming hours before her matches. Roland Garros? That wasn't supposed to happen for a player still climbing the rankings. But Eala was becoming an exception. Then came Washington. And that's when the phenomenon exploded. Eala entered the Mubadala City DC Open as a talented young player. She left as a champion. Not just any champion. She became the first Filipina to win a WTA Tour-level singles title after defeating Jessica Pegula in a rain-delayed final. And suddenly, the demand became impossible to ignore. The tennis world wasn't asking, "Who is Alex Eala?" It was asking, "When does Alex Eala play?" That's a completely different level of attention. And then she went to Toronto. The Filipino community there embraced her in a way that stunned even experienced tournament officials. Thousands of fans turned up. Philippine flags filled the stadium. And Eala's matches became some of the most talked-about sessions of the tournament. The story wasn't just about tennis anymore. It was about community. And Cincinnati is now experiencing the next stage of that phenomenon. Because there is something fascinating happening with Eala's ticket demand. Her popularity is beginning to behave differently from traditional tennis popularity. Normally, a player's ticket value depends heavily on the opponent. A major star versus another major star. Prices rise. A Grand Slam champion. Prices rise. A semifinal or final. Prices rise. But Eala has started creating demand before the opponent is even known. That is the important part. People aren't necessarily buying a ticket because they know exactly who she will face. They're buying because they know Alex Eala will be there. And that is a very different economic proposition. It means the player herself becomes part of the product. The tournament becomes more valuable because she is inside the draw. That's what sports executives dream about. A player who can move tickets. a player who can bring new fans, a player who can create an atmosphere, and most importantly, a player whose popularity extends beyond the traditional tennis audience. Coco Gauff has already recognized this. Gauff has spoken positively about Eala bringing a new demographic to women's tennis. And that's exactly what appears to be happening. Because many Filipino supporters aren't longtime tennis fans. They're discovering the sport through Eala. Some are watching because they have followed her journey from the beginning. Others are watching because they finally have a player from their country competing at the highest level. And others simply want to be part of something historic. That's why the ticket story is bigger than a price increase. It's about who is entering the tennis market. A new audience, a passionate audience, and an audience that has already demonstrated that it is willing to travel. That brings us to one of the most incredible parts of the Eala phenomenon. The fans don't just show up locally. They move. They follow her. They travel between tournaments. A fan who watches Eala in one city can potentially show up hundreds of miles away for her next match. And suddenly, a tennis tournament in Ohio isn't just competing for the attention of local tennis fans. It's competing for the attention of a global Filipino community. That changes the equation. Because the Philippines has more than 110 million people, and millions of Filipinos live outside the country, that diaspora has become one of the most visible parts of Eala's rise. Wherever she goes, Filipinos recognize her. And when they recognize her, they bring their flags. They bring their families. They bring their friends. And they bring their voices. That's why the Cincinnati story is so fascinating. The tournament spent millions rebuilding its facilities. It attracted one of the strongest fields on the tennis calendar. It already had a massive audience. But Alex Eala is creating something the organizers can't simply manufacture. Emotion. You can't buy that with a renovation. You can't build it with a new scoreboard. You can't create it with a marketing campaign. It happens when people genuinely care. And Filipino fans clearly care. Now imagine what happens when those fans walk into Cincinnati. Imagine the first moment Eala's name is announced. The stadium begins to react. One flag rises. Then another. Then dozens. Then hundreds. And suddenly, a section of the crowd becomes a sea of Philippine colors. That is the atmosphere Eala has already experienced around the world. And now Cincinnati has to handle it. The tournament itself knows how large its audience can become. It recorded nearly 286,000 attendees last year. The 2026 edition is being staged on a dramatically expanded and renovated site, with 31 courts and major new fan facilities. This is not some tiny tournament struggling for attention. This is one of the biggest events on the WTA calendar. And that's exactly why Eala's ticket demand matters. If a player can noticeably affect demand at an event of this size, executives around women's tennis are going to pay attention. Because Eala isn't just selling tickets. She's potentially expanding the audience. And that might be her most valuable contribution of all. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Eala isn't arriving in Cincinnati as the unknown player she once was. She's arriving as a champion. She's arriving after Wimbledon. She's arriving after Washington. She's arriving with a ranking that has climbed dramatically. And she's arriving with expectations. That changes the psychology completely. Before Washington, a deep run would have been celebrated. After Washington, a deep run is expected. Before Eala became a champion, fans wanted to see what she could do. Now they want to know how far she can go. And that means every ticket buyer is also buying into a story. They want to witness the next chapter. Maybe it's another upset. Maybe it's another deep run. Maybe it's another historic moment. And perhaps that's the real reason prices are climbing. Nobody wants to hear about history after it happens. They want to be there when it happens. And Alex Eala has already proven that history can happen very quickly. She proved it in Washington. She proved it at Wimbledon. And now Cincinnati is next. The tickets are moving. The fans are preparing. The flags are coming. And the question is no longer whether Alex Eala has a fanbase. She clearly does. The question is how large this phenomenon can become. Because if Cincinnati is already seeing this level of demand, imagine what happens when Eala reaches New York. Imagine the US Open. Imagine Flushing Meadows. Imagine a Filipino crowd surrounding a major stadium as Eala walks onto the court. That is where this story could become even bigger. But before New York, there is Cincinnati. And before Cincinnati can become another chapter in Eala's incredible rise, she has to do something very simple. She has to win tennis matches. Because no amount of ticket demand can hit a forehand. No flag can save a match point. And no crowd can guarantee victory. Eala still has to prove herself on court. And that's exactly what makes this story so compelling. The hype is enormous. The expectations are growing. The ticket demand is real. But the tennis still decides everything. And Alex Eala is about to find out just how much pressure comes with becoming the player everyone wants to see. Cincinnati is waiting. And judging by the demand, the fans aren't willing to wait quietly. But here's where the Cincinnati ticket story becomes much bigger than a price increase. Because Alex Eala isn't simply attracting more people to a tennis match. She's attracting people who may never have cared about tennis before. That is the difference. For many Filipino fans, Eala isn't just another player in a WTA draw. She's a representation of home, culture, family, and national pride. And we've already seen what happens when that connection reaches a major tournament. Washington gave Eala her first WTA title. Toronto took the phenomenon to another level. Filipino fans filled the stands, waved flags, and turned her matches into some of the loudest sessions of the tournament. Even players on the other side of the net noticed. Belinda Bencic, after defeating Eala in Toronto, acknowledged that most of the crowd had been supporting the Filipina. That's the kind of atmosphere Eala now carries with her. And Cincinnati is next. The fascinating part is that Eala doesn't need to win the tournament for the demand to exist. Fans want to see her because they don't know what will happen next. Will she upset another major star? Will she make another deep run? Will she continue her incredible rise? Those questions are selling tickets. And that's why the reported jump in resale prices is so significant. The market is telling us something. People are willing to pay a premium simply to be inside the stadium when Alex Eala plays. That's extremely rare. In traditional tennis economics, the biggest draws are usually Grand Slam champions, former world number ones, or superstar rivalries. Eala is building her own category. She's becoming a destination player. A player fans travel to see. A player whose name can influence where people spend their money. And she's doing it at just 21 years old. That's what should make tournament executives pay attention. Because Eala's rise isn't happening in isolation. The WTA is constantly looking for ways to bring new audiences into women's tennis. And here is a player who is doing exactly that organically. Filipino families are discovering tennis. Young fans are watching. Diaspora communities are organizing. And people who might never have bought a WTA ticket are suddenly asking, when is Alex playing? That question may ultimately be more valuable than any ranking. Because rankings change. Tournament results change. But a passionate fanbase can last for decades. And Eala is building that fanbase right now. Of course, there is another side to this. The bigger the crowd becomes, the greater the pressure. Eala can no longer quietly enter a tournament and surprise everyone. People expect her. They recognize her. They cheer for her. And increasingly, they expect her to win. That's a completely different challenge. But Eala has already shown that she can handle pressure. She has played on some of tennis's biggest stages. She has beaten elite opponents. She became the first Filipina to win a WTA Tour level singles title. And instead of acting like she has reached the finish line, she continues talking about improving. That's why Cincinnati matters. This isn't simply another tournament. It's a test of whether Eala can turn her explosive breakthrough into sustained success. The ticket demand tells us what the fans believe. Now Eala has to show us what she believes. Because when she walks onto that Cincinnati court, the stadium might be packed. The Philippine flags might be everywhere. The chants might echo through the venue, and the resale market might be going crazy. But eventually the cheering stops. The umpire says, "Time," and the ball goes into play. At that moment, everything comes down to Alex Eala. Her serve, her movement, her mentality, her ability to handle pressure, and her ability to win. That's what makes this story so exciting. The ticket prices may be rising. The demand may be exploding. But the most valuable thing Eala is creating isn't a more expensive ticket. It's a reason for millions of people to care. And if she continues winning, the numbers could become even more unbelievable. Washington was the breakthrough. Toronto was the phenomenon. Cincinnati could be the confirmation. Confirmation that Alex Eala isn't simply having a great season. She's building something much bigger. A career. A movement. And potentially one of the most passionate fan bases women's tennis has seen in years. So when those lights come on in Cincinnati and the Philippine flags begin appearing throughout the stands, remember, those fans aren't just paying for a seat. They're paying for the possibility of witnessing history. And Alex Eala has already shown us that when she steps onto a tennis court, history can happen very quickly. The tickets may be sold out, the prices may be climbing, but Alex Eala's story is only getting started. Fire.